take a break from the live pictures. You'll still see the live pictures, but I do want to introduce into this conversation someone who's played, well, an important role in the struggle for higher education within South Africa. And you'll know the background to this, of course. A man, a 36-year-old man, losing his life in the middle of these protests this morning outside Wits University, coming out of a doctor's room when he was shot, it seems, by police officers. IPID investigating this. Well, someone who's played an important role in all of this in the past. The struggle for higher education is Chumani Maxwele. Chumani, good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. We all remember the role that you played. I'm sure you've seen that this person lost his life. You'll have seen the anger and frustration of the students and the struggle for higher education. It must remind you of the struggles that we've already seen.
Yes, good afternoon, Stephen. Good afternoon to your listeners at home. Yes, indeed, it's an unfortunate scene that we've witnessed today. And of course, this scene does not come out of the blue. We've been raising the question of the police brutality in our country and the approach that the police are using in dealing with the issues of students in our campuses. But of course, the police have got a seemingly a singular mandate to just astonish students and the public generally by their mass of their violence, as opposed to control the law and order. They are not there to do the law and order question, but they're there to really brutalize students. Therefore, what we've seen today is as a result of their seemingly a mandate.
I mean, in some ways, what's astonishing to me is that 5, 6, 7 years ago, even before then, of course, on many campuses, the dynamic hasn't changed. Students aren't receiving, they aren't able to afford the education that they need to improve their situation. Police are acting in the way in which, in some ways, they've always acted. This dynamic just hasn't changed, despite political promises.
Yes, certainly. Nothing has changed. But I suppose the question here is the management of the police service as opposed to the police force. Now, that, as you would know, that there's still a problem in the definition there. Whether are they there to serve or are they there to enforce force? But I suppose one of the challenges that we are experiencing in our campuses now is a historical problem of the mismanagement of NEFSAS in the first instance, wherein this institute that is meant to provide poor students with money and ability to go to university is unable to manage its funds and its affairs. And when we have seen in the past couple of years, wherein the institute itself was under administration, it tells you there's a problem. And as former student activists and leaders, we did express our discomfort in how NEFSAS is mismanaged in our country. And of course, generally, NEFSAS proclaimed that they've got a capacity, but we've been saying that NEFSAS does not have a capacity. As a result, even the former CEO of First Rand, Mr. Sizwe Nxasana, was unable to turn around that institution. It tells you the deep-seated structural problems of that institution. Up until we resolve that issue, we will be able to be in the right direction. However, another thing that we must address is the question of the new 790,000 application that our government have been saying that the young people must apply on time. And today, young people, they've done that, but they cannot be able to be absorbed by the institution in our country. And of course, we must ask the historical question, whether do we have adequate number of institutions to be able to absorb young people who are coming from the deep rural areas of Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape? That the question is no. Then we must be able to then find out the reasons why, part of which is it's a question of finance. But I'm saying that for the question of finance is not that simple and straightforward, but it's also the question of mismanagement of those funds.
At the same time, Chumani, I mean, the world has changed in the last 5 years, not in this dynamic. I mean, again, and I'm reminded that Dr. Bladen Zamanda is again the Minister of Higher Education. We'll come to that in a moment. But one way that the world has changed is we've realized the value of distance education. I'm talking about online education. I'm talking about how the world is changing during the pandemic. You would think that one of the responses to the situation that we have, which is a demand and a need for society and for students to go into higher education, all you would do is you would literally double the number of places available at UNISA, one of the world's oldest distance universities, you know, almost a century, over a century of experience in this. Instead, I understand that the minister instructed UNISA to cut its number of first-year places this year.
Well, I suppose, I mean, the minister's comment, I suppose it was a misplaced comment in terms of cutting down the number of absorption, because I think he's operating in the old paradigm in terms of the capacity that the university can be able to absorb. Now, COVID has forced us towards the visual learning, and that's what we have been doing in the past year or so. And now I don't know why the minister found it necessary to limit students. I mean, UNISA have been doing that for a couple of years. Now other universities have been teaching in the past 6 months or so. And I don't know why the minister saw it necessary to do that, but I think it is about time for us in South Africa, particularly as a developing state, to be able to use the new technology of learning via Teams or via Zooms and stuff like that, so that we can be able to absorb as many young people as possible in our universities, but also is to move away from the paradigm of accepting, because the challenge that the higher education is facing is a question of accommodation and a question of the physical presence of students. I suppose the university is supposed to have by now produced a new hybrid type of learning wherein those students who are keen to go to the physical institution can be able, such as medical students, nurses, and technical technical science students. But those who don't need laboratories can be able to learn from home. And of course, the question that we have to answer, which is a broad question, is the question of access to data. The question of data we've raised so many times that there's an expensive amount of data that students had to pay. The universities, as well as our government, must be able to answer that so that students can be able to learn from home using the new technologies. Most of the students now, they do have computers, and I'm sure private sector can be able to come in to assist the state in terms of access to computers, laptops, as well as the iPads, so that students can be able to learn from home, because that is part and parcel of answering the question of physical presence, which is what the Minister Nzimande was talking about. Now we need to move away from the physical presence. We don't need it. The world over is moving towards online learning. Now, I don't know why our government is forcing students to go back to university physically as opposed to be at home and learn from home, so that the question of physicality, you'll find that the reason why the university cannot be able to absorb so many students is precisely because of their capacity to accommodate students in terms of accommodation as well as fees, because the fees can be drastically reduced if students are learning from home. That is our position at the moment.
There are all sorts of conversations that we need to have about higher education, and we will have them. As a society, we haven't yet found the solution, Chumani, as you well know. I would say, as a government priority to its people, the top few priorities would be obviously health, obviously things like social grants, obviously basic education. But higher education, you would think, would be pretty high on the list, right? I mean, you would need peace and security and all of those things. The point I'm trying to get to is, do we spend too much money on other things and not enough on higher education? Or are we just looking at it all the entire wrong way? Or do we need to restructure all of society, if you see what I mean? I suppose the real question is government prioritizing spending on higher education enough?
Well, I suppose there will never be enough and adequate prioritization of higher education in our government. But I suppose what we need to do now is to really come up with a new paradigm shift in terms of emphasizing the idea of education from basic education to higher education. But what we have now, for example, our government is so insistent on spending on social welfare, which in itself, it's an endless process that cannot be able to help us as a developmental state. The only way we can be able to assist young people out of poverty is to make sure that they access higher education and access basic education. Part of which is for us to be able to say from early on that we cannot have young people who register for social grants, yet they're able bodies, they've got all that they need in terms of their physicalities. But equally, we must be able to inculcate a new culture of thinking, a new culture in terms of ethos, to say young people must be able to be the problem solvers of the problem that they are facing in society. Our government must be able, therefore, to come up with programs wherein young people can be able to say, look, I am absorbed by government, I'm able to access higher learning institution so that I can be able to contribute in our society positively. But what government is doing at the moment is to give young people social grants. That is a wrong approach that government is supposed to take. Should stop the thing of social grant, particularly to young people. So